I'm a 33-year-old woman named Meredith, and this happened right after my divorce. After 6 years of marriage, my husband blindsided me by cleaning out our joint savings and leaving me with barely enough to cover 2 months of rent. I had no time to prepare. The apartment lease was in his name, and he gave me a week to move out. I didn't have the energy to fight. I was emotionally worn out, financially gutted, and ashamed to tell anyone how bad it had gotten. Clarissa, my older sister by 3 years, told me to come stay with her. She lived about an hour outside the city in a quiet neighborhood with her husband Dan and their daughter Lacey, who had just turned 7. But their house was the kind you'd see in real estate ads: polished wood floors, an open kitchen, oversized windows letting in too much sun. It even had a garden swing out back. She gave me the guest room without hesitation. Said she was proud of me for walking away from something toxic. Kept telling people I was strong. For the first few weeks, it felt like maybe I'd finally caught a break. I took the guest room, unpacked my life into a single dresser and half a closet, and tried not to feel like a burden. I worked remotely part-time as a digital copy editor for a publishing company, which covered just enough for groceries and half the utilities. Clarissa never asked me to pitch in, but I did it anyway. I cooked dinner twice a week, helped clean, and picked Lacey up from school every other day. On weekends, I even helped with her homework or watched her so Clarissa and Dan could go out for dinner. We started doing these weekly sister nights, just the two of us. We'd open a bottle of wine, throw on old rom-coms, and stay up until midnight laughing at memories from when we were kids. For the first time in months, I felt stable again. It wasn't perfect, but it felt manageable. Clarissa told me more than once, "You're safe now. That's all that matters." She meant it in that warm, sisterly way, or at least that's how it sounded. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe someone was on my side. One afternoon, I was scrolling through Instagram while waiting for a file to upload and saw a photo she'd posted from one of our wine nights. The caption reads, "So proud of my sister for starting over after years of therapy and rehab. It's been a journey, but she's finally home." My stomach turned. I stared at the words for what felt like an hour. I'd never been in rehab. I'd never even needed therapy for addiction or anything like that. I didn't even drink more than a glass or two on weekends, and certainly not alone. I showed it to her the same night. She shrugged, told me not to overthink it. "No one takes Instagram seriously," she said, laughing like I was being dramatic. "People like a redemption story. Just let them have it." Then she poured me another glass and changed the subject. I let it go. Not because I believed her, but because I didn't want to lose the only lifeline I had left. From then on, little things started to shift. She'd mentioned the tough years to her friends when I was in the room. Drop comments like, "You've come so far, Mayor," in front of her coworkers at dinner. She told her neighbor I was still adjusting and that I was finally stable after hitting rock bottom. I didn't correct her. I didn't want to make waves. I just started shrinking a little more every time it happened. Then came the favors. At first it was helping with Lacey more, watching her late into the evenings when both Clarissa and Dan picked up extra shifts. Then Clarissa asked if I could chip in for Lacey's birthday party. Nothing major, just some decorations, snacks, and a cake. I said yes. I always said yes. One evening while cleaning up after dinner, I overheard a phone call Clarissa was on. She was in the kitchen with her AirPods in, and I only caught her half of the conversation, but I heard her say, she wouldn't be here if it weren't for me. I practically rebuilt her. It's like having a second child sometimes. I stood there in the hallway, holding Lacey's backpack in one hand, trying to decide if I'd misheard. A week later, Clarissa hosted a dinner party with some of her friends from the office. She introduced me to someone as her sister who went through the ringer but pulled through, thanks to the right support system. She said it while squeezing my shoulder like I was a pet she rescued. I felt frozen, like I was suddenly playing a role in some fake story. When everyone left, I told her I didn't like how she talked about me to people. She acted confused, asked if I was feeling overly sensitive again. And then she reminded me how lucky I was to have a roof over my head. That night, I started keeping a private folder. Screenshots, audio recordings, notes. I didn't know what I'd do with them, but something inside me clicked. I wasn't going to be anyone's charity project or PR stunt. She had secrets too. And unlike the ones she made up about me, hers were real. I just didn't plan on using them. Not yet. It started with brunch. Clarissa had her small group of neighborhood friends over one Sunday, women from her yoga class, school moms, one woman she met at a wine tasting. I made pancakes, set the table, and stayed mostly in the background. But during mimosas, Clarissa brought up my healing journey. That was her new favorite phrase. She talked about how proud she was of me for staying strong after everything. Then she casually mentioned how she once had to stop me from walking into traffic. I paused mid-step, carrying a plate to the sink. That had never happened. I never once tried anything like that. Her friends all turned toward me with those pitying eyes. One reached out and touched my hand. "You're so strong. Clarissa is such a rock for you." I just nodded. I didn't want to embarrass her or myself, but my hands were shaking when I put the dishes in the washer. That night, I started journaling everything. Dates, times, what she said, how people reacted. I wasn't sure what I was looking for yet, but something felt twisted. Clarissa's stories didn't match my reality, but everyone else believed them because she said it with such conviction. It didn't feel like a misunderstanding anymore. It felt like a script. I booked an appointment with a therapist the next week. It took some juggling with my schedule, but I needed to hear from someone neutral. I told her everything, from the divorce to moving in with Clarissa to the strange things people were starting to say around me. After 2 sessions, she told me gently but firmly, someone was rewriting my life, and I'd been letting them. The word she used was co-opting. Clarissa was taking my trauma, some of it real, some of it invented, and using it to make herself look like a savior. She was becoming the centerpiece of my story, and I was just a prop. One night, I was pouring Lacey a glass of milk when Dan walked in. He seemed distracted and didn't say much. As he grabbed a beer from the fridge, he muttered, "Clarissa was on the phone again, telling someone she pulled you out of a psychiatric spiral," or something like that. He didn't say it accusingly, more like it was odd to him too. He left the room before I could respond, but it gave me an idea. At dinner the next evening, I tested something. Clarissa brought up one of her yoga friends who had been through a lot, and then gave me a little glance like she always did when she was setting up for one of her stories. Before she could launch into it, I calmly said, "Actually, I left my marriage because he couldn't handle my independence. I wasn't the one with mental issues." Dan looked up from his plate. Clarissa let out a weird laugh, like she was trying to play it off. She said something vague about how everyone has their struggles, then moved on to another topic. Later, Later, while we were cleaning up, she pulled me into the kitchen. Her grip on my arm was tighter than necessary. Her voice was low, sharp. "Don't ever contradict me like that in front of Dan again," she said. Then she smiled and walked out like nothing had happened. That was the moment the mask slipped. I waited until everyone was asleep, then opened her social media accounts on my laptop. Her main Instagram account was public. I scrolled back through the last 6 months. It was all carefully curated, photos of Lacey doing art projects, her and Dan on date nights, smoothie bowls, inspirational quotes. But then I started noticing the captions. There were tags like Trauma Survivor Sisters, Healing Journey, Mental Health Advocate. One post had a picture of our wine night setup, and the caption talked about rebuilding trust after betrayal and addiction. She never mentioned my name directly, but the timeline matched when I'd moved in. The language: my sister came home broken, holding space for someone else's recovery, watching her relearn stability. It was all clearly about me. Another post mentioned how she had taken on a caretaker role for someone she loves, and that it had tested her strength but made her a better mother and wife. I screenshot everything. Every post, every comment where someone praised her for her selflessness or called her an angel on earth. I created a new hidden folder on my laptop, encrypted it, backed it up on a flash drive. I knew this wasn't about online drama. It was about control. She wasn't just painting me as weak, she was making sure I stayed weak so she could keep playing the hero. Over the next week, I noticed she started calling me things like delicate in front of Dan, said I was sensitive to loud noises or still adjusting to a normal routine. Every night it was something new. One evening she even suggested I stop driving Lacey to school because it might be too overwhelming with your condition. That was the word she used. Condition. I didn't argue. I just nodded and agreed. Then I bought a small audio recorder. I had no plan yet, but I knew this wouldn't end with just screenshots. I wasn't going to confront her until I had everything. I had a feeling she'd be careful around her friends, but not behind closed doors. She'd started playing games. So I decided I'd play smarter. The blow-up started with a calm question. I was folding laundry in the living room while Clarissa sat on the couch scrolling through her phone. I asked her, without anger, to stop using my personal life for her social media posts. I said it wasn't fair to twist things that never happened just so strangers could praise her online. Her phone dropped to her lap. Her entire mood changed in an instant. She stood up, walked over, and accused me of being ungrateful. Said she gave me a roof when no one else did. Said she could have let me crash for a month and move on, but instead she kept me out of pity. Her voice got louder with every sentence. I didn't yell back. I just reminded her that I paid for half the groceries and utilities since day one. She laughed, called it pocket change, and stormed off. The next morning, I noticed the office door was locked. That door had always been open. It wasn't even an office before. I'd seen Lacey use it for arts and crafts. Clarissa never cared who walked in there. Now she was keeping it shut like it held state secrets. 2 days later, I was doing a puzzle with Lacey at the kitchen table when she casually mentioned that her mom was writing a book, said it was about strong women, and one of the characters was a sad sister who came to live with her family after she broke her brain. Her words, not mine. I kept my face neutral and just nodded. That night, I waited until Clarissa left for a PTA meeting. I walked straight to the office. The lock was one of those basic interior ones, and a hairpin did the trick in seconds. Inside, the desk light was still on. A thick printed manuscript sat next to her laptop, clipped in sections with bright sticky notes labeled Draft 3, Edits and Final Outline. I flipped open the top section. The story was about two sisters, Caroline and Marie, thinly veiled versions of Clarissa and me. Caroline, clearly based on her, was successful and poised. Marie, clearly meant to be me, was unstable and dependent. Her marriage fell apart. She was depressed, unstable, and needed saving. The more I read, the more I realized she hadn't even tried to make it subtle. Marie moved in after a suicide attempt. Caroline rescued her. Marie had episodes. Caroline talked her through panic attacks, wiped her tears after breakdowns, called therapists, drove her to rehab. In one chapter, Marie locked herself in the bathroom with a bottle of pills. Caroline broke down the door. None of it happened. Not one word of it. I had never attempted suicide. I never locked myself in any room. I had one panic attack years ago during my divorce, and it was after reading the final divorce paperwork alone in my car. That was it. She'd turned me into a damaged, childlike figure in her fiction. But the worst part wasn't even the lie. It was how she made herself the savior in every single chapter. I stood there for a long time, just holding the pages. Then I heard the front door click. I rushed out, but not fast enough. Dan saw me stepping out of the office and looked at the slightly ajar door behind me. His brow furrowed for a moment, like he'd been wondering about that locked room too. He asked if everything was okay, and for once I didn't try to lie. I told him I found the manuscript. I told him exactly what was in it. He looked tired more than anything. Said, she lives in her own version of reality sometimes. I asked if he knew she was writing about me. He nodded slowly, then said, she told me you were okay with it. That was the part that caught me off guard. She had lied to even him. Told him I was fine with her publishing a story where I'd basically been portrayed as a mental health charity case. That was the moment I realized I had no idea how many people she'd manipulated or how deep it went. Back in my room, I packed a small go bag. Just essentials, toiletries, 2 outfits, laptop, charger, backup drive with the folder of screenshots. I didn't plan to leave right away, but I needed a backup in case I had to walk out on a moment's notice. I booked a weekend Airbnb just 20 minutes away using a different email account, one with no connection to my main address or name. I paid in cash through a prepaid card and didn't save the location in any devices. I didn't tell anyone, not even Dan. He might have been sympathetic, but I couldn't risk Clarissa knowing. She controlled too much of the narrative already. I wasn't going to give her a new one to spin. Over the next few days, I acted normal, made breakfast, picked up Lacey from school, laughed at the dinner table when Dan cracked a joke. Meanwhile, I kept gathering more printed versions of her social media posts, notes from her manuscript, a voice memo of her telling one of her friends on speakerphone that I was unstable but manageable. She thought she had control of the story. What she didn't realize was that I now had something of hers too, something real. And once I confirmed it, I was going to use it. Because Clarissa's secret wasn't just about what she said online or what she wrote in a book. It was something she thought no one knew. But I did. I just needed proof. And I was close. The morning after I packed the go bag, I started recording everything. I didn't want to leave anything up for debate anymore. I used a voice recorder app that ran in the background of my phone. Every phone call with Clarissa every dinner conversation, every one of her little jabs that seemed innocent to outsiders but meant something else when stitched together. Yeah, everything was being logged. She had a habit of walking around with her phone on speaker when talking to friends. Maybe she liked being heard, or maybe she wanted an audience. Either way, I caught her mid-call saying I might change the sister's name again. Meredith is still too close to the original. She was in the laundry room, folding towels. I was in the hallway pretending to vacuum. That line told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't just writing for herself. This wasn't some personal passion project. She was planning to put it out there. Later that evening, I remembered the old laptop she used during college. She'd stashed it in the closet of the guest room when I first moved in. I'd helped her clean out that closet. I remembered the charger wrapped in a scarf. She never changed her passwords. I plugged it in, and after a few minutes, got in using her usual login. The email app still worked. I opened her drafts and starred items first. One stood out right away, a pitch to a literary agent. The subject line, debut memoir submission. Inside was a message describing her book as a true-to-life account about the mental unraveling of a woman saved by her sister's patience and guidance. She wrote about how the sister had experienced severe depressive episodes, emotional instability, and was recovering from addiction. Attached was a selfie, us at brunch. The caption below said, "Me and the inspiration for Marie." I felt sick reading it. The agent had replied with interest. She asked for the full manuscript and mentioned an upcoming nonfiction spotlight for memoirs involving mental health journeys. The message was a month old. I checked her sent folder. Clarissa had sent the full manuscript 2 weeks ago. I forwarded the entire exchange, emails, attachments, photo, to my own address. I also backed it up on a drive and uploaded it to a cloud account under a different name. Then I logged out, cleared the cache, unplugged the laptop, and returned it exactly where it was. The next day, I called my therapist. I asked if she could write a statement confirming that during our sessions, I had never mentioned addiction, suicide, or needing emotional rescue. She agreed to prepare a signed and dated letter. I picked it up the same afternoon. When I got back home, Clarissa was in the kitchen organizing a box of tea light candles and plastic flower garlands. She told me she was planning something big and winked like she was hiding a surprise. Her face held that plastic smile, the one she used when things weren't actually cheerful. I just nodded and walked past her. That night, I applied for 3 apartment listings in neighborhoods near my job. One was barely within my budget. The other 2 would wipe my savings if anything went wrong. I didn't care. I needed out. I sent polite but urgent inquiries, then set alerts on every major rental app. I even messaged an old coworker to ask if she knew anyone renting out a room, just in case. Later that week, I was reading on my bed when Lacey wandered in. She had a drawing in one hand, something with a house, a sun, and 2 stick figures, one taller than the other with long scribbled hair. She climbed up beside me and asked, "Why is mommy always sad when she talks about you?" I didn't know what to say at first. I just pulled her close and told her, sometimes people tell sad stories to feel better about themselves. She didn't ask more questions. She just kept drawing. I hugged her and tried not to let her see how tight my jaw had gotten. Clarissa had created this entire fiction about me, not just for herself, but for strangers. She'd convinced people, possibly even a publisher, that I was this fragile, broken thing she'd rescued. She used my real face, my name, my life, and now she was about to make it public. I didn't wait for the surprise she was planning. I emailed the literary agent using my own name. I attached the therapist's signed statement, excerpts of Clarissa's posts and captions, and the truth, plain and clear. I said the manuscript was based on lies, that I was not unstable, not recovering, not anything she described. I asked them to please take it seriously and consider the consequences of moving forward. I didn't know if the agent would believe me or even respond, but I planted a seed. The next morning, I received a reply, "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We are placing the manuscript on hold while we look into this." That was the first time I felt like I had moved the needle, but I still wasn't safe in that house. Clarissa didn't know yet that I had seen her emails or contacted her agent, but once she did, I knew it wouldn't be quiet. Lacey's birthday fell on a Saturday, and Clarissa planned a small get-together. That's what she called it when she stuck a printed invitation on the fridge and mentioned that her friends from yoga and work would be coming. Earlier that week, I overheard Clarissa on the phone mentioning she'd invited someone special from her writing circle, someone she was hoping to impress. I didn't think much of it until I saw her literary agent arrive at the party. I offered to help with setup, like I always did. She told me not to worry, said she had everything covered, didn't ask me to bake cupcakes like she usually did, didn't hand me a checklist like she had the past 2 years. I knew what it meant. She wanted me presentable, not useful. Still, I arrived downstairs early that morning, an hour before guests were due. She was in the backyard stringing up banners while Dan arranged chairs. On the kitchen island sat a neat stack of white paper with a bold title, Sister of Silence. Underneath the title in a large serif font was by Clarissa Harlow. I didn't touch the manuscript, but I didn't need to. The chapter headers were visible from where I stood, the bathroom floor, the night of the breakdown, finding her among the ashes. None of it was real, but every page mirrored moments from my actual life. Clarissa had taken my calendar, my routines, even old text conversations, and warped them into fiction with just enough change to call it inspired. Her agent arrived 20 minutes early. She was polite, mid-40s, well-dressed, and sharp-eyed. She introduced herself to me and said, "I've heard so much. I'm a fan of your sister's work. And you must be Marie?" She laughed like it was a joke. Then she leaned in slightly and asked, "How are you doing these days?" Her tone was kind, but I could feel the weight behind it. I smiled, played dumb, said I was doing well. Then I excused myself, slipped upstairs, and called the Airbnb I'd been watching all week. It was still available. I booked 2 nights with the option to extend and got the address texted to my phone. The host left the key in a lockbox. Back downstairs, the party picked up. Clarissa stood by the cake table in a flowy dress and made a toast just before serving snacks. She held her glass up and said she wanted to thank the people who had supported her, and especially my biggest inspiration, even though she doesn't always realize it. Everyone turned toward me. I raised my glass with a smile, like I'd just won a fake award, and took a sip to hide my clenched teeth. People clapped. Lacey ran around with her friends. Dan stood next to the grill flipping burgers. I slipped into the garage, needing a break from the performance. A few minutes later, Dan came in. He didn't knock, just leaned on the wall next to the shelves of holiday decor. After a long pause, he asked, "You're leaving, aren't you?" I didn't deny it. I told him yes. I told him I had already packed. Then I handed him a small UI from my pocket. It was labeled with a single letter, C. Inside it were files I'd compiled for weeks, screenshots of Clarissa's social media posts, emails to and from the agent, audio clips of her distorting the truth, and the therapist's signed statement that I had never expressed suicidal thoughts or rehab history. I said, "You deserve to know what she's doing and what she's hiding." Dan didn't ask what was on it. Well, he just nodded, said, "That explains a lot." Then he left the garage without saying another word. I returned to the party, walked upstairs, grabbed my go bag, and came back down before anyone noticed I'd gone missing. Clarissa was lighting candles with her back to the room. I stepped out the front door, got into my car, and drove away before they cut the cake. At the Airbnb, I let myself in quietly. The space was small, studio style, plain, but it was clean. I left my phone charging on the dresser, brushed my teeth, and fell asleep for 9 hours straight. No dreams, no grinding teeth, just silence. The next morning, I woke up to a message from Dan. It just said, "I read it all. I need to tell you something. It's about the real reason Clarissa quit her last job." I replied, "Call when you're alone." Okay. He called an hour later. The first thing he told me was that Clarissa hadn't resigned to focus on family, like she'd told everyone. According to Dan, she had been quietly pushed out after her last employer discovered she'd written several blog posts under a fake identity using confidential client stories, embellished versions that violated non-disclosure agreements. She avoided a lawsuit by agreeing to leave quietly and delete the content. That was the missing puzzle piece. She'd done it before, twisted real people into stories for her own gain. I wasn't the first target, just the closest. I thanked Dan for telling me and ended the call. Now that I had everything, I was no longer waiting to leave. I was already gone, and Clarissa's version of my story was about to lose its final chapter. Dan didn't waste time after our last call. He forwarded me the documents, scans from his personal files, saved on a drive he'd quietly backed up after Clarissa's work scandal nearly 2 years ago. According to him, she was caught plagiarizing a client's personal story for an internal newsletter at her firm. It wasn't vague either. Word for word, she copied an employee's account of surviving postpartum depression and submitted it as her own writing, under her own byline. Someone in human resources flagged the similarities after reading the original. The company launched a quiet internal investigation. Clarissa denied it, then claimed she was inspired by someone else's story and had internalized it. Legal was ready to take it further, but the company wanted to avoid bad press. So they offered a mutual separation, no lawsuit, no formal write-up, just an agreement to walk away quietly. She signed it and spun the story as if she left to pursue her real passion. Dan told me all of this while sitting in his car during a lunch break. He hadn't said anything before because Clarissa had begged him to keep it private. She promised it was a one-time lapse in judgment, but now he understood. She hadn't changed. She just moved on to a softer target, her own sister. I told him what the literary agent had said in their last email and how Clarissa's pitch was getting serious traction. She was aiming for a non-fiction deal built on lies, and this time the subject wasn't anonymous. It was me. He asked if I planned to stop her. I said I wasn't out for revenge, but if she tried to profit off of my life, I wanted something solid and clear that could shut it all down. Dan offered to anonymously send the USB I gave him to the agent if Clarissa ever tried to sign a publishing agreement. I agreed, with one condition. I wanted her to know I knew. I didn't want her to think I left quietly because I was scared. I wanted her to understand I saw her now for who she really was, and I wasn't afraid to walk away. 2 days later, I went back to the house while she was at a midweek lunch with her book club. I knew she wouldn't be home for hours. She liked long wine-heavy meetings with her friends. I parked on the street, used the spare key Dan had left for me in the lockbox, and went inside. I moved fast. I packed everything I owned into 2 duffel bags and a rolling suitcase. Laptop, notebooks, flash drive backups, clothes, a few gifts from Lacey, and the ceramic mug Clarissa always made fun of, but I'd had since college. I took none of the items Clarissa had ever given me. No clothes, no jewelry, nothing that could be called hers. I left the guest room tidy, made the bed, even wiped down the desk. Before I left, I wrote 2 notes. One was for Lacey. I kept it short, told her that I loved her, that she was smart and kind and funny, and that she could always call me if she ever needed to talk or ask a question. I left it in her nightstand drawer, tucked under her favorite graphic novel where she'd be sure to find it but not right away. The second note I left on Clarissa's dresser. It said, "You always wanted to be the storyteller. Just don't forget who lived the real story." Then I opened her office drawer and placed a sealed envelope inside. It contained 2 documents. One was a printed copy of my therapist's letter, dated and signed. The second was a scan of the plagiarism report from her last job, the one Dan had quietly kept. No explanation, no message, just the facts, for her past and her present, side by side. I closed the drawer, turned off the lights, locked the door behind me, and walked away without looking back. That night, Clarissa started texting me. The first message was, "Did you take your things? Then, we need to talk. Then, why would you do this? You're ruining everything." I didn't respond. The messages kept coming, 6 in total. The last one said, "You have no idea what you've done." But I did. I'd taken the mask off. The version of herself she sold to the world didn't hold up when faced with proof. She could rewrite her image on paper, on social media, and into toasts at parties, but reality had receipts now. I didn't block her. Not yet. But I muted every notification and saved the messages just in case. The next day, I updated my rental to a monthly lease. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I also called the literary agent's office and confirmed my name and contact were listed on the submission file now, per the formal dispute. They confirmed the project had been removed from active review until they could verify narrative integrity. Clarissa hadn't just lost control of the story. She'd finally met someone who refused to play the character she wrote for them. A week passed. I didn't reply to Clarissa's texts. I didn't answer her calls. I didn't reach out to explain myself or try to soften the silence. I knew silence was the one thing she couldn't control, the one reaction she didn't know how to frame for others. And this time, there was nothing for her to spin. Dan called me on a Wednesday afternoon. I let it go to voicemail at first, but when I checked it later, I heard him say, "She's unraveling." He told me that after I left, Clarissa kept up her usual front until she opened her desk drawer and found the envelope. She didn't mention it to him directly, but he saw her pacing the bedroom that night, shaking and muttering under her breath. He said she pretended to be calm the next day until she noticed the USB was gone. That was when the panic really started. She tore apart drawers, questioned Dan, even asked Lacey if she'd seen it. Dan didn't give it back. Oh, he kept it safe. That same day, Clarissa sent an email to her agent. Dan forwarded it to me. It said she wanted to pause the book indefinitely due to creative fatigue. No mention of me. No explanation about what changed. Just a short message with a nervous tone behind the phrasing. Within hours of sending that email, she deleted all the social media posts where she'd hinted about Marie, rescue, healing, and all the other hashtags she'd leaned on to build her story. The captions disappeared. The posts turned blank or were removed entirely. The comments under them were gone too. She didn't say anything publicly. I hadn't asked her to do that. I hadn't demanded an apology, a call, a face-to-face. I'd done something worse. I'd walked away and left her with nothing to perform for. And from what Dan told me, that silence was eating her alive faster than anything else I could have said. But it didn't end there. 2 days later, my phone rang from a number I hadn't saved in years, our parents' landline. I let it go to voicemail too, but then it rang again. This time it was my father's cell. I picked up. My mother was on speaker. Clarissa had told them I'd abandoned her and left without warning. That Lacey was crying and confused. That I'd taken advantage of her generosity and then ghosted the family. I asked them to meet me in person. No texts. No calls. Just one coffee meeting. We sat at a quiet cafe near my new rental. I had my laptop with me, and I walked them through everything. Emails, screenshots, photos of the manuscript, the therapist's letter, even the plagiarism report Dan had shared. I didn't speak angrily. I just laid it out, step by step, like I was telling someone else's story from the outside. They didn't interrupt much. My mother kept her hands folded. My father rubbed the bridge of his nose halfway through. When I finished, neither of them asked a single question. Finally, my father said, "That's not the kind of help you give someone. That's theater." My mother just nodded slowly and cried. I told them I wasn't asking them to pick sides. I just didn't want them to believe a story that was never mine to begin with. 2 nights later, Clarissa sent another message. Long, rambling, full of contradictions. She wrote that she never meant harm, that she was just trying to make sense of the chaos, and ended with one final line, "I didn't think you'd ever leave. I thought you'd always need me." I didn't reply to that either. Dan told me he had started staying part-time with a friend across town. He was taking Lacey with him during those stays, saying he didn't want her around the strange tension in the house. Clarissa insisted things were fine, that she just needed space to write. But Dan said she hadn't touched her manuscript since I left. Meanwhile, I signed a lease for a small apartment. Nothing fancy, just 1 bedroom, a balcony, and enough sunlight to work by without needing the lamps during the day. I unpacked my things for the last time. I made a list of clients to reach out to for freelance writing, and within a week I had 3 small contracts. One of them was ghostwriting for a lifestyle coach. Another was editing web content. It didn't matter what it was. What mattered was that no one was rewriting my life in exchange for praise. As for Clarissa's secret, I never went public. I didn't expose her on social media or contact her agent again. I didn't try to ruin her career. I didn't need to. People like her always find ways to trip over their own performance. She lives in a house full of mirrors now, and every reflection reminds her of the version of me she invented. But the real version, the one with a voice, a spine, and the proof, walked away. She took me in to play the hero. But I didn't need rescuing. I needed honesty. And when I left, I took the only thing she truly feared losing, her ability to control the ending.